Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulullah, ma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So dead, subhanAllah, man. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, it's better, mashallah. So, Jazakallah khair first and foremost for the brothers and sisters involved in organizing this event today. And Jazakallah khair for all of you brothers and sisters turning out today, mashallah. The sisters have, subhanAllah, outnumbered the brothers by a great amount, but may Allah bless every single one of you. And we know the football's on these days, you know, the World Cup's on, so the youth especially are busy, occupied with that. But khair, nevertheless, inshallah, as I was saying to the brother, even if one person turns up and that one person benefits from this, inshallah, we've done a job. That's one person who can go out there and make a huge difference in society, inshallah. So the topic that we're addressing today is atheism and how we tackle atheism, especially in the 21st century. Now, sorry, okay. Is that okay? Yeah. So yeah, the topic we're addressing, inshallah, is atheism and how we tackle atheism in the 21st century. Because the reality is, we live in a time where this worldview, which is named atheism, is spreading, right? And it's quite popular, especially amongst the youth, in schools, in colleges, in universities. But what I want to do today, inshallah, is I want to present to you the reality of this worldview. And what I want to show you is that there's nothing to be worried about, because the reality is many brothers and sisters, I've come across countless. I get emails almost every other day by brothers and sisters confused about very fundamental basic questions. They're lost, they worry, they freak out. As soon as, for example, evolution is a big thing, right? Let's take that as an example. As soon as evolution is taught in schools, right, and it's presented, generally speaking, it's presented as absolute fact, right? What they present evolution as is that it's absolute truth. This is what happened. Animals evolved, human beings evolved. This is what they teach fundamentally. Now, when they're taught this, because we don't understand the scientific method, because we don't understand the atheist worldview, because we don't really understand Islam to an extent and why we believe Islam is the truth and is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because we don't understand these things, we worry and we freak out. We don't know what to do. Our iman's shaken, right? We're left in a state of confusion. And then we're looking for answers. But inshallah, my aim today is to leave you, brothers and sisters, with the correct understanding of some of these fundamental concepts. And so when we understand these things, we will have a completely new perspective on understanding what science is, what atheism is, and how we know Islam is from the Creator, and why Islam is the absolute truth. The absolute truth, and why that's our authority of knowledge. That's our source of absolute knowledge. Not science, not any other method, but Islam and the Quran, inshallah. Now, another reason the event itself was organized was because recently an individual named Alim Shah, who is an atheist, who was originally from a Bangladeshi background, a Muslim, became atheist, and he wrote a book called the Young Atheist Handbook, right? And what they've done now is that they're funding a project by which they are delivering this handbook to every single secondary school in the UK. Every single secondary school. Now, I want us to really understand what's going on here. Already we live in a system where majority of the schools, let's face it, they're not religious-based schools, they're secular schools. If anything, generally speaking, they have a neutral position. And on top of it, if our youth, especially the Muslim youth, are being fed this information through such materials such as the Young Atheist Handbook, then they're going to have questions. They're going to be confused. You know, they're going to be challenged. And this is why it's essential we address these things today, inshallah. Now, briefly, I'm not going to go into the Young Atheist Handbook too much, but because it's relevant, I am going to address this briefly. See, what Alim Shah has done in the book is that he shares his story. He shares his life story, his experiences, the trials and tribulations that he went through in his life, his tests, as we believe in Islam, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us. He was tested in his life, right? And we can relate to this. As a human being, we respect his emotions and his feelings. But what he does, and which I feel like is quite unjust and is not called for, is that he tries to link his emotions and his emotional situation, the emotional situations that he went through in his life, he tries to link these with reason and rationality, with argumentation, right? So the book, what you see, is a combination of his emotional experiences, his emotional upbringing and the trials and tribulations he went through, combined with arguments, which aren't really understood, and he doesn't really understand these arguments. And he presents them in a very non-genuine way. So what I would suggest, inshallah, as far as this book in particular is concerned, to study Brother Hamza Dortz's article that he wrote in response to this, inshallah. And we're working on with some brothers and sisters to compile email addresses for secondary schools around UK, so we can send this response article to them as well, inshallah. And if you read this article, what Hamza does in a very beautiful way is he breaks this down. What he does is that he respects Alam Shah's emotional position and him as a human being, but he detaches that from his arguments. And what he does is he shows how flawed these arguments are, inshallah. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to address some of these arguments today and show you exactly why they're flawed, inshallah. Now, the very first thing I want to do, before we get into the meat of the subject, if you like, is refer to a verse from the Quran, right? And I want to really understand this and remember this throughout the entire talk or lecture, whatever you want to call it. See, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in chapter 2, verse 13, He says, when they are told to believe, as everyone else does, they say, should we believe as the fools do? In fact, they themselves are the fools, but they do not know. SubhanAllah, this is a profound verse. Now, in particular, this is referring to the hypocrites at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. But this verse applies. The Quran applies throughout time, throughout history. This verse really applies, because what you're going to see is, because what happens is atheism, or atheists, particular atheists, we're not saying all atheists are in the same boat. We're not saying all atheists have an agenda against Islam, right? But they are particular individuals, particular atheists who have an agenda, who have a motive to attack Islam in particular and to break it down, right? And to put shubahat in the hearts and minds of Muslims and to confuse them. There is this agenda amongst certain people. What I want to show is that if you break down atheism, you really understand what atheism is, what you would see, inshallah, is that it has no basis. It has no basis. And as I normally say, if you like, and this is not disrespect to any atheist, but it's the, see, we respect human beings and individuals, but we don't have to respect ideas, and especially if they're false. We have to, as Muslims, break them down and present the truth, right? And atheism, in reality, it's an ant in the disguise of an elephant. It's an ant disguised as an elephant, right? You have individuals such as Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss and all of these people. Who knows Richard Dawkins? Yeah. Who's heard of Richard Dawkins? A couple of brothers, mashallah, right? Now I would say he's an anti-theist, right? He's very, very staunch. He's very aggressive, in particular towards Islam. Very aggressive. But when you see the reality of atheism, what you'll notice is what they believe has no basis. It's empty. And the first thing I want to do is I want to detach atheism and science, right? What tends to happen, or what the notion or the narrative out there is, that science and atheism go hand in hand, right? We have science. This is what they say. We have science, therefore we don't need God. We know how things work, we don't need the why, right? We know how the rain clouds form and the rain forms and how it rains. We know how the water cycle works. We know how the human body functions, therefore we don't need God. This is the narrative. This is the trap that's being laid out there for us. This is a trap that's been laid down out there for us. But when we understand what science is, what we will see is that it's a beautiful method and it's just being hijacked. It's just been hijacked by particular individuals who are trying to use it against theists, against Islam in particular. So what is science? Let's have a look at science quickly. Science is a method, right? Bertrand Russell, a philosopher of science, he describes science as an attempt to discover by means of observation and reasoning based upon it particular facts about the world. This is what he says. So in essence, what he's saying is that science is a method that human beings use to try to come to particular facts about the physical world around us. Through what? Through observations, through doing observations, using our senses, and then basing our reasoning on it, right? And what the beautiful thing is, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to do in the Quran, right? Allah tells us continuously, do you not look at the creation? Do you not look into the created world? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, Look into the horizons, and within yourselves there are signs within ourselves. Allah says, do you not look at the camels and how they were created? So what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us to do? He's telling us to observe. He's telling us to observe the physical world and then use our aql, use our reasoning on this observation, and then come to the conclusion that He exists. SubhanAllah, this is how profound the Quran is. The Quran, in other words, is telling us to do science. Muslims don't have a problem against science, the method. The scientific method is a beautiful method that we should use. Because what does science do? It tells us how things work. When we understand the how of things, it allows us to appreciate the creative power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is how beautiful it is. And this is what I want to do quickly, is make the distinction between the how and the why. Right? Now the narrative is, we know how things work, we don't need God. Right? This is what they say. But just because you know how something works doesn't mean there's no why. It doesn't mean there's no why. So I'll give you an example. Say this brother here, mashallah, what's your name, akhi? Abdul Rahman. Say Abdul Rahman loves me, yeah? He loves me, and to show his love, what he does, he bakes me a cake, yeah? He bakes me a nice chocolate cake, yeah? Or a nice strawberry cake, yeah? And he comes to me, he gives me the cake, yeah? I take the cake and I don't eat the cake. What I do is I take it to a scientist, right? I present him the cake. What's the scientist going to do? I give him, say, 2 months. He takes 2 months, he studies the cake, yeah? He can come back to me and he can tell me what raw materials were used in the cake, how much sugar was used, how much chocolate was used, how many strawberries were used, how many calories are in this cake, how long it was baked for, right? At what temperature it was baked. He can come and tell me all of these things. He could tell me the how, right? But can the scientist tell me, now think about this, can the scientist tell me who baked the cake for me and why that person baked the cake for me? Can he tell me this? No. Beyond the scope of science. This question is beyond the scope of science. Now, if the scientist then said, because I don't know who or why, therefore there is no who or why, is that a sensible thing to do? Of course not. Just because you can't explain something via the scientific method, which is a beautiful method, but is limited, just because you can't explain something using this method doesn't mean there's no explanation. Right? And this is what we really need to understand, because what's happening is this trap that's being laid out there. Just tell the people, we know the how, the science gives us the how. You don't need God. We know how thunder happens. We don't need God anymore. We know how the trees grow. We don't need God. This is what they're saying, but the reality is they tell us the how. They can't tell us the why. And if anything, take this analogy. Imagine there's a clock, right? Imagine there's a clock. Imagine there's a clock. Now on this clock, what's on the clock? On the clock face. What is on the clock face? Yes, bro. Hands and what else? Time. Okay, but what shows us the time? What is that? Numbers. Yeah. So a face, a clock face, it has hands and it has numbers, right? Now here's what a scientist does. A scientist comes and he peels this face away. He peels that paper or cardboard or whatever it is, he peels it away, revealing the gears and the mechanics inside the clock. The precisely aligned gears and mechanics. Yeah? The scientist is revealing this. He's telling us the how, right? He can tell us how these gears line up and what size they are and how they work together. Now, seeing the gears, should this bring us closer to Allah or further away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Closer. Because now not only are we seeing the hands and the numbers, but we're seeing the mechanics, the detail, the precision. And when we see this precision, it leads us to appreciate the creative power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even more. So this is the thing, brothers and sisters. Realize the difference between the how and the why. They may not teach you this at school. See, when Dawkins was asked about should we study the philosophy of science or what science is, he said, don't do it, just do the science. This is one of the reasons why. They're trying to mask the reality. This is the agenda, they're trying to mask this reality. Particular individuals at least. But we need to understand this. And we need to transcend this. And once we understand this basic thing, inshallah, this does another profound thing. This does another profound thing. Now that we understand the difference between the how and the why, we can appreciate the miracles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again. We can appreciate the signs of Allah again. See, the sad thing is, when we look at the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does He do? How often does Allah try to prove His existence in the Quran? How often? How often does Allah say that, look, here's the logical, philosophical reasons I exist, believe in me? Allah doesn't do this in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never does this in the Quran. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does is He speaks about His signs. He tells us about His signs which are all around us. Allah says in the Quran, verily in the creations of the heavens and the earth and the alternation of the night and day, in it are signs for who? For those of understanding, for those who use the intellects. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves. And within themselves until it becomes clear to them that this is the truth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's not wasting time trying to address atheists. He is telling us, use this, what I've given you, use this and you will see the signs. Look at the world around us. And remember the how and the why. And I'm going to share some of these beautiful signs with you just so we can once again start to develop this appreciation for these signs. And really appreciate them for what they are. Because once we understand the how and why, we can really appreciate these beautiful signs. See, one of the signs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shares with us, one of many signs is found in Surah Nahl, verses 68 and 69. And pay attention to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying here. He says, and your Lord inspired to the bee. Take for yourselves amongst the mountains, houses, and amongst the trees, in that which they construct. Then eat from all the fruits, and follow the way of your Lord laid down for you. There emerges from their bellies a drink varying in colors, in which there is a healing for people. Indeed, in that is a sign for people who give thought. This is another beautiful thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does, that once He shares a sign with us, sometimes He tells us to use those people with intellects, those people who reflect. He tells us, use this. Now let's look at the bee. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the bee. Now the amazing thing about the bee, there's many amazing things. I'll share a few with you. One, for a bee to produce 1 teaspoon of honey, 1 teaspoon, just a small teaspoon of honey, it takes around 5,000 visits to a flower. 5,000 visits for a bee to produce 1 small teaspoon of honey. So much trouble that this little insect goes through just to produce 1 teaspoon of honey. Subhanallah. Who inspires it? The bees, they produce so much honey that they don't require this much honey. Who do they produce it for? Who inspires them to produce this much honey? The honey that we drink, the honey that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about, there's healing in it for us. Who inspires them to produce this? Allah. These are signs from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The construction of the beehive itself. Now I studied engineering, and we studied structural engineering to a degree as well. The amazing thing about the beehive, who knows the shape of the hive? The shape that's used to construct the hive, the bees use. Can someone tell me? Hexagon, hexagonal shape. Does anyone know why? Or not the why, or can anyone know some of the wisdoms behind the shape? Why this shape over any other shape? Symmetrical, but there's a few key points. Number one, that particular shape, say if there's an area, I don't know, say 1 meter by meter, yeah? A beehive that's 1 meter by meter. The hexagonal shape that's constructed by the wax of the bees use their wax to construct this shape, this hive. Any other shape would take up too much space with the wax and you would leave less space for the honey. The most economical, if you like, shape or structure to use is the hexagonal shape, the structure, in this space. Say if there's 1 meter by meter of a hexagonal shaped hive and there's 1 meter and meter by of a triangular shaped hive, yeah? The triangular shaped hive will take up too much space. The wax will take up too much space. But they're so economical. It's the best shape to use. Not only this, structurally, it's the most sound shape. If you look at the strength to weight ratio of this particular shape, it's the most sound. It's the most strong. It's the strongest shape to use. Who tells the bee this? The bee is no bigger than the tip of our fingers. It's no bigger than the tip of our fingers. If a human being, we took centuries coming up, so when we look at structural engineering, we took centuries to come up with the best shapes to use in construction. That are the lightest but the strongest. But who inspired this bee that's smaller than our fingertip? Allah. Allah did. Not only this, if we look further, the hive itself, it's not straight. You know the hive, the hexagonal shape doesn't go straight through. It's tilted. It's slightly tilted so the honey doesn't run back out of the hive. SubhanAllah, sign after sign after sign. Just from the bee. And this is the thing, when we read the Quran, we shouldn't just superficially read the verses. May Allah allow us all to do this, to ponder upon the Quran more. Because when we read each verse, we need to study these verses, ponder over them, reflect over them, because when we do, it truly allows us to appreciate the creative power of Allah. It allows us to submit to Allah even more. When we see these beautiful miracles that surround us. Let's look at another one. I'll share another one with you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says again in Surah Nahl, verse 4, He says, خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِن نُطْفَةٍ فَإِذَا هُوَ خَصِيمٌ مُبِينٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that He created, and I'm paraphrasing the words, He created mankind from a drop of semen, a drop of fluid. And this very human being instantaneously stands in front of Allah as a contender. Instantaneously stands in front of Allah as an adversary. And this is such a beautiful verse because not only does it give us a sign, but it gives us a means to appreciate that sign as well. And it also addresses these people, certain atheists, who have maintained or reached this arrogant position. I don't need God. What's God done for me? Right? But look at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. He reminds us of our origins first. Where did we come from? A drop of dirty mixed fluid. Think about this. See this bottle. See, if it condenses in a little while because of the heat, there's some droplets in the top of the bottle. You are nothing more than a drop. Nothing more than a drop. About 20, 30, maybe 40 years ago, every single one of us here was no more than a drop of liquid. Think about this for a second. And now so many years later, you're sitting here, a fully functioning human being who has the ability to think, who has the ability to ponder, who has the ability to reflect, who has the ability to understand, who has the ability to talk and communicate, to feel happy, to feel sad, to feel sorry, to empathize, to do all of these things. Who brought us to this place? How did we get to this place? From a drop of water, dead drop of water, to a fully functioning human being. All you need is time, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. How does that happen? SubhanAllah, when we ponder upon this, how can science, again, think about this, the how and the why. Let's apply it here. How? Fine, science can tell us some of the how. Right? How a drop of fluid turns into a fully functioning human being. Can the science tell us the why? Can't tell us the why. Now, does that mean because it can't tell us the why, there's no why? Of course not. Of course not. To claim that there's no why and we're just here by chance, we're just the product of this blind, random process, just stardust, that's just happened to go through this blind and unconscious process, and we've ended up as fully functioning human beings that are conscious. To claim that this happened like this is crazy. So hopefully by now you're starting to see some of the flaws of claiming that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not exist. To even think that Allah doesn't exist renders us silly, renders us fools. And this is what Allah tells us. They say, should we believe as the fools believe? They are the fools, but they don't know it. And they're trying to delude us with the lies that they're believing. SubhanAllah. This is a profound. And another amazing thing about this verse, another beautiful thing about this verse is, understand the arrogance. You know, sometimes when we're giving dawah, when we're speaking to people, or someone reaches the level of a professor or a PhD, and the individuals like Richard Dawkins, they're very arrogant. They have this arrogance about them, right? And they say, I don't need God. What's God done for me? We know how things work. But this verse, what does it tell us? Look at your origins, mate. Look at where you came from. You were a drop of liquid. And now you're standing in this position. You think you know everything. You don't know anything. You didn't bring yourself here. You didn't create yourself. So humble yourself. Because this arrogance is doing nothing but destroying you. SubhanAllah, and it allows us to appreciate this. And once we understand this, and it humbles us. Once we humble ourselves, then again, another means to turn back to these verses and understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us. Understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sharing with us. So hopefully, inshallah, that sort of clarifies the thing. And another point I want to make is that a statement that Numan Ali Khan, I heard him say recently on one of his lectures, he said that our dawah in the 21st century these days is free of the Quran. We don't use the Quran in the dawah. We use philosophical, logical argumentations, and that's it. I was guilty of this myself initially when I first started. All we're worried about is meeting them on their level, which is important. We need to understand the tools that they use. They use philosophy to understand these things, but realize that their cut-off point is this philosophy, is their minds. They don't believe in anything higher, and they're limiting themselves. We have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have the ultimate source of knowledge, right? This is what we need to understand. We need to turn back to the Quran. We need to use the Quran. We don't use it. We use logical, rational argumentations. Fine. You'll make someone believe in a God. Defeats the purpose. They'll say, okay, I believe in God. I'm going to live my life as I want to live. I don't need to do anything special. I'll carry on drinking. I'll carry on partying. I'll carry on fornicating. And I'll carry on doing all of these things. I believe in God. That's not what Islam is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us the best way. We need revelation. Human beings are in the need of revelation, and we need to communicate this revelation in our dawah. Share these signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with them. Share them because they're profound and they appeal to the fitrah. They appeal to the aql, that we understand these things. And we can appreciate these things. SubhanAllah. Now the next thing, inshallah, I want to move on to is one of the most common arguments made by atheists. And I think this is pretty much the only argument that atheists put forth. And that's the problem of evil, right? Probably many of you have heard it here. What they say is that, okay, if God exists and He's all good, and He's only good, then there shouldn't be evil in the world. And because there's evil and suffering in the world, therefore God can't exist. Right? This is the argument they make, but it's a flawed argument, especially when we look at it from the Islamic perspective. It's flawed from several ways. I'm going to share with you 3 key points which break this argument down from its core. Number one, first and most importantly, we need to realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not just good and that's it. We know there's 99 names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala which are reconciled with reality. We know He's the just. We know He's the wise. We know He's the provider. We know all of these. He has 99 names and attributes. He's not just good, right? Let's take wisdom for example, yeah? Allah is the wise. Now as human beings, we have the pixel. We only understand certain things. We don't have all knowledge. Allah has the picture. Allah has the complete knowledge. He knows everything. He's the creator of everything, right? So there's wisdom behind things, right? And as someone says, well, I can't see the wisdom, therefore there's no wisdom, it's a logical fallacy. This is arguing from ignorance. Just because you don't know, that doesn't mean there's wisdom there. A beautiful example that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala draws in the Quran we can reflect over is the story of Khidr and Musa alayhi salam. What happens when Musa accompanies Khidr? SubhanAllah, many things happen and Musa doesn't understand the wisdom alayhi salam at the time. He doesn't understand the wisdom and he becomes impatient. When he sculls the boat, for example, he makes a hole in the boat. Musa alayhi salam doesn't understand what's going on, why he did this. But just because Musa alayhi salam didn't have the wisdom doesn't mean there's wisdom there, because he finds out at the end why these things were done. So we need to explain to them, just because you don't understand the wisdom doesn't mean there's no wisdom there, right? So an analogy you can give is that, say I'm sitting at home, right? And our brother here, he comes to visit me again, yeah? Sorry, I keep picking on you, yeah? But he comes to visit me, yeah? And he's sitting down, I bring some tea for him, yeah? And he's sitting there and he hears screams coming out of one of the rooms in my house. He hears people screaming really loud, someone screaming really loud. He says, what's going on? I said, nothing's going on, don't worry about it. The screams get louder and louder. So he goes into the room to investigate. He opens the door, as soon as he goes in, what does he see? He sees a man lying on the floor, right? And another man, he's got a knife in his hand, he's got a saw, and he's cutting the leg of the man. He's cutting his leg off, right? What are you going to think? The man's screaming, another man's cutting his leg off, what are you going to think?
He's crazy.
He's crazy. This is evil, yeah? He's going to run out, he's going to say, what are you doing? There's evil happening in your house. The man's cutting his leg off. But say if I told him, calm down for a second. The man whose leg is being cut off, he suffers from a disease that if his leg is not cut off, he will die. And the man who's cutting the leg off, he is a surgeon, he's a doctor. What's going to happen? What's going to happen with you? Your perception is going to change, right?
It's not evil.
What are you going to think? It's not evil anymore. See? He now knows certain wisdom that he didn't know before. He now understands certain things that he didn't understand before. Yeah? And his perception changes. Just because he didn't understand the wisdom in the first place didn't mean there was no wisdom there. So if he had jumped to the conclusion that this is evil and I believe it's evil and that's it, that's fallacious. He's just selling himself short. He's doing injustice to himself. So that's point number one. Point number two is that there's another assumption, and the assumption is that Allah has no reason to permit evil in the world. He has no reason to punish people in the world. But we need to realize that from the Islamic perspective, what is this life? Are we here to have a party? Are we here to have a party? No. Are we here to have fun? No. Where's that? That's paradise. That's Jannah, inshallah. May Allah bless us all and allow us to attain Jannah, the highest levels of Jannah, inshallah. But that's where there's peace, there's tranquility. This life is a test. Allah told us He created this life to test us. Test which of us are best in deeds. We're not here to have fun. And this is the problem. See, when the atheist approaches the theist, or the Muslim in particular, he comes with the mindset there's nothing beyond this life, right? So that's his presupposition. That's his basis that he comes with, that there's nothing beyond this life. So he doesn't understand when he sees evil in this world, when he sees trials and tribulations in this world. He can't appreciate this. So we need to make him understand that, look, from our perspective, this life is a test, no problem. We're here to be tested. We're going to be tested. And finally, and this is the most important point, is that the atheist has no basis to even ask the question or suppose something is evil. Right? And this is something I want us to understand. If an atheist comes and he says, this is objectively evil, this is wrong, this is absolutely wrong, what basis does he say that? What basis does he have to claim something is absolutely wrong or evil? Nothing. If he denies Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you deny God, you have no grounding to validate objective moral values and duties. You have no grounding to claim something is absolutely right. What grounding do you have? You have nothing. Because in the absence of God, think about this. If you deny Allah exists, what are we? We are an accident. We are an accidental biological byproduct of a lengthy evolutionary process. We're here by chance. We weren't supposed to be here. Accidents don't have any meaning or any purpose. You can't claim something is right or wrong. We're not moral agents. We're just accidents. We've just evolved. That's it, according to them. We're animals. What difference does it make, if I slap the brother or he kicks me? Why is that wrong? On atheism, there's no reasons to believe that's wrong. So they have no basis, they have no grounding to even make the judgment in the first place. So one way you can approach is whenever they come to you and say, why is this evil happening? To ask them, is this actually evil? Do you believe this is absolutely evil? Because if it is, then you're supposing God. Because in the absence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can't claim anything's objectively evil anyway. What do you have to fall back on? Social consensus or evolution? Let's look at these briefly. What does a social consensus mean? In the absence of God, how do we come to good and evil, right and wrong? One option is social pressure, meaning society comes together and determines what is right and what is wrong, right? Society comes together and determines what is right and wrong. Is this objective? Is this absolute? No. It's subjective. It's based on what these particular group of people think, right? Imagine a group in the UK and there's a group of people in India, yeah? 20 people in the UK, 20 people in India. The 20 people in the UK, they believe it's good, it's objectively wrong to cut your hair on a Thursday, for example, yeah? The group in India believe it's objectively wrong. No, it's absolutely right to cut your hair on a Thursday. Who's right? Who's right? None of them. It's their subjective opinions. It's one group's subjective opinions versus another group's subjective opinions. There's no absolutes in the absence of God. So the very fact that they claim something is objectively evil, objectively wrong, objectively bad, absolutely bad, that necessitates Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That proves Allah exists. I wouldn't use the word proof because Allah is necessary. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is necessary. You don't even need to prove Allah. He is necessary for us to even use or claim objective morality. So inshallah this hopefully helps. And in the Q&A, if something's not clear, we can address it further inshallah. So that being the problem of evil, and that's the most common argument. Wallahi, brothers and sisters, I've been doing this for a while. The biggest argument that they will bring to you is this. If God exists and He's good, why is there evil? And from an Islamic perspective, it's a flawed argument. There's no basis to it. So the problem of evil is not really evil from an Islamic perspective at all. Because once we understand these three base assumptions. So the next thing I want to point out, and I want to break it down. And before we do this, remind ourselves once again of the verse. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, when they're told to believe like the others believe, they say, should we believe as the fools believe? But they are the fools and they realize it not. Remember this, brothers and sisters, remember this verse, because this is the reality of this worldview. This is the reality of maintaining Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't exist, or even to claim such a thing. You leave yourself, you render yourself a fool. And again, I have no disrespect towards atheists. Some atheists are amazing people. They're very nice people, very kind people. Atheists can do good. We're not saying atheists can't do good if God doesn't exist, but they cannot validate it. They cannot ground good and evil, right? And it's the worldview which is flawed, and that's what we're discussing today. So the next thing I want to address is the absurdity of life in the absence of God. What does it mean to deny God from an existential perspective, meaning from the perspective of meaning and purpose, right? What does it mean? Think about this. In the absence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you say Allah doesn't exist, what does that mean? That means you have no purpose. You have no ultimate purpose. Accidents don't have a purpose. Has an accident ever had a purpose? Think about this. You know when you say you got a glass of milk and you walk into your room, you drop it, you smash the glass. Was there a purpose behind it? You just dropped the glass. It's an accident, it happened. Do you see? So accidents don't have a purpose. They can claim purpose. Normally when you ask an individual, what's your purpose, what's your ultimate purpose? They say, I want to be a doctor, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a scientist, I want to be an astronomer, I don't know, many things, right? I want to do charity work. But you got to remember, this is purpose that we give ourselves. This is purpose we give ourselves as human beings. It's not absolute purpose. All we are is an accident. This is what they're claiming. They're claiming that they are just accidents, accidental byproducts of a lengthy evolutionary process, nothing more. Here today, gone tomorrow. In the absence of God, there's no true meaning to life. There's no meaning to life. How can you claim meaning? If this brother, myself, and Richard Dawkins, If we're all going to end up in the grave, 6 foot under, we're all going to die and we're all going to become worm's meat. If we're all just going to become worm's meat and be eaten by maggots and worms, what does anything mean? What does it mean to do good? What does it mean to do bad? Nothing. This is why certain philosophers have said that if there is no God, then the best way to live is a selfish life. Fulfill your desires, fulfill your nafs. There's nothing to come. Live selfish, it makes sense. But we know we're more than this. We live our lives knowing we're more than this. This is the important thing. Even atheists, the way they live as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. They can't deny this reality. Allah is necessary. But when they're asked about Allah, they deny Allah. But they live knowing what's right and wrong. They live doing right and wrong, right? They live good lives. They live kind lives, most of them at least. But when it comes to Allah, when they're asked about Allah, they deny God. But if they deny God, they deny everything about themselves. And this is why, again, emphasizing the fact Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they are the fools, but they know it not. They are the fools, but they know it not. They don't know this. And instead of us falling into their traps, what we need to do is go and help these people. Because they're lost. We need to feel empathy for these people. We need to sympathize with them. Because not only are they lost, but they're lost in their own delusions. They're confused to such an extent. They've sent themselves down such a road where it's almost like they're never going to come back. May Allah guide them. May Allah guide them to the truth. But they're lost. And they're so deluded that they're sharing the delusions with Muslims. And we need to empower ourselves to not only realize the reality of what they're doing, but to go out and help them and convey the message to them as well, inshallah. This is what we need to do as Muslims. Empower ourselves, inshallah. Now, the next thing, inshallah, just briefly, or before we move on, is happiness. The next thing I want to address is happiness, inshallah. If they claim that Allah doesn't exist, no one can truly be happy. You can't have true happiness. And happiness is one of those fundamental things that we search for as human beings. We want to be happy, right? Generally, you can ask anyone the question, what do you want in life? What do you aspire for? It will always come, if you ask the why question, come down to happiness. It will almost always come down to happiness. They want to be happy. They want to be fulfilled. You want to earn money, you want a bigger house, you want a car, you want all these things because you want to be happy. You want to be happy, but the sad thing is, in the absence of God, you can chase the dunya, but you're not going to find happiness. You're not going to find tranquility and satisfaction and contentment. These people don't know this. Again, another reason we need to go and communicate the message to them. But think about this. I'll give you an analogy. Imagine you're on a train. Yeah, and you can share this with the atheists. Imagine you're on a train. Actually, you're not on a train. Imagine you're just here now, and you go home and you fall asleep. Yeah? You go home and you fall asleep. You wake up and you're on a train. You just ended up on this train somehow. You don't know how you got on the train. You don't know where the train's going. You don't know who put you there. You don't know if it's going to stop or not. But suddenly, for a few seconds, just for a few minutes, you become distracted. You start to notice people. You start to notice sounds. You start to notice the comfort of your chair that you're sitting in. You start to feel the chair and notice how comfortable this chair is. You start to notice that there's amazing food in front of you. You start to hear the sounds, or maybe the nasheeds for the Muslims, yeah, or something like this, yeah? You start to notice and hear these things. Temporarily, you become distracted. But in this distraction, can you truly be happy? Can you truly be happy? No. If you don't have the answers to the fundamental questions that we all ask ourselves as human beings, all ask ourselves, how can we be happy even though we're temporarily distracted? We want to know, how do we end up on this train? Where's the train going? Where's it going to end up? And this is the reality of life. If you deny Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're just an accident. You don't have the answers to these questions that you're asking. Another interesting point to ponder over is that if we were just a product of these blind and random processes and just evolved through these blind and random and unconscious processes, what was the need for these blind and random processes to develop the intellect to the point where we would ask these questions? If it's all about survival, just survival, we're just animals wanting to survive, why would this process lead to the development of us asking these questions, the faculties that ask these questions? Who am I? Where have I come from? Where am I going? Why would it lead to the development of such questions which lead to depression? Which lead to depression. Even just recently, a couple of months ago, there was a 14-year-old girl. She hung herself in the park. She hung herself in a local park and she wrote on her hand or her arm that I have no purpose. This is a child. 14 years old. Wallahi, I have no purpose. This is the reality. If you deny Allah, you destroy yourself. Because Allah has created you on the fitrah. He's put this innate questioning inside you. This is a mercy of Allah. He's made it easy for us. Not only does He give us revelation in the Quran, but He gives us the fitrah, which also innately recognizes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when you deny this reality, you break down. You will break down, and this is the reality. And this is why we live in one of the richest countries in the world, in the West. We have all the amenities, all the eases of life, but it also has one of the highest rates of consumption of Prozac, one of the highest rates of depression. Why? Think about this. Because we are empty. These people are empty inside. They don't know the truth. And wallahi, brothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with the truth. Islam is the truth, and it fits the human psychology like a glove. We need Islam. And these people need Islam as well. But they're misinformed. The media's pumping this crazy narrative about Islam. On top of this, us Muslims who know the truth, who Allah has blessed to be practicing, we're not going out and sharing this message. Who's going to be accountable? Wallahi, brothers and sisters, think about this today. Who is going to be accountable on the Day of Judgment for these people? These people like this girl who committed suicide and hung herself, who was 14 years old. Who's going to be accountable for the thousands of children and teenagers who are being divorced from God? The society is divorcing God from the reality, God from life. These people who are being misled, who are misinformed, are ending up depressed, ending up committing suicide. Who's going to be responsible for these people? Who's going to be asked? We're responsible, ikhwan. We are responsible. We have this duty. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us throughout the Quran, communicate the message, call people to the truth. Call people to the way of your Lord. Share this message with people. And it's a duty upon us, brothers and sisters. And one of the things I wanted to achieve, inshallah, by the end of this talk is one thing. If you leave with one thing today, is that realize, one, we have no reason to be worried or frightened about the atheist worldview, or that, oh my God, science, or anything like this. We, if anything, need to understand that we've been blessed with this position to help these people. Help these people who are confused and lost. Because they need help. They need guidance. They need the truth. SubhanAllah, I was recently listening to a lecture on the Prophet ﷺ. If you look at the concern that the Prophet ﷺ had for these people, in the narration, in the hadith, I think, where the Prophet ﷺ, he tells us that the parable of, or the comparison of me and you is that you're like moths that are flying towards the fire. You're like moths that are flying towards the fire, and I'm trying to stop you. I'm trying to stop you. And if I can remember correctly, I think it was Numan Ali Khan who mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ, when he shared this, or when he spoke of this narration, he was crying. He was worried. We know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the Prophet ﷺ and tells him, are you going to be worried to the extent where you're going to kill yourself? You're going to destroy yourself over these people. We need to have concern for these people. We need to be worried. Yes, we need to take care of ourselves. We need to worry about ourselves and where we're going to end up. But we need to also share the message with these people the best we can, as little as we can. So what I'm saying is, don't only be defensive, but be on the offensive, in a positive way. Go and share the truth with these people. They need it. They need it, wallahi. And inshallah, the last thing I want to conclude, and the one final thing I want to share with you guys, is how far this rabbit hole goes. Yeah? How far this hole goes. Let's recap quickly. Deny God, what happens? You deny God, you have no purpose, you have no meaning, you have no true happiness, you're lost and you're confused, you don't know anything really. You have no knowledge, you have no truth. Not only this, but you deny your basic faculties. Something as human beings that we use and we take for granted is what? Logic. We use our intellects, we use logic. Yes? This is one of these things. Logic is a basic thing we use. When we're crossing the road, when we're going downstairs, when we're having a bath, anything we do, we use logic. Right? We know, okay, this is not going to be safe, this is not going to be good. We use our ability to use logic and come to these conclusions. Right? But if you deny Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, if you deny God, you deny the use of logic. Because what is logic? What is logic? Is logic material? Are the laws of logic material? No. Can you touch logic? Can you feel logic? Can you smell it? No. It's something that's immaterial. Is it absolute? Yes, it is. It's unchanging. Right? It's unchanging. It's universal. For example, this bottle, yeah? This bottle is full of water. And this is the truth, yes? Everyone agrees this bottle is full of water. Now, can the bottle be full of water and not be full of water at the same time in the same way? Is that possible? Can this bottle be full and be empty at the same time in the same way? No. This is one of the laws of logic, the law of non-contradiction, right? The law of non-contradiction basically states that A cannot be A and not be A at the same time. So the bottle cannot be full and empty at the same time, right? And this is universal, this is unchanging. How can you validate this law in the absence of God? How can you account for a law that's immaterial, universal and unchanging in the absence of God? Remember, it's all accidental. It's all the product of blind random process. They can't even use logic, they can't even account for it. They can use it, but when they use it, they prove that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, or they show the necessity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. See, this is the problem. They live life like God exists, like Allah exists. But when they're asked about Allah, they deny Allah. This is the reality. Wallahi, when you claim that Allah doesn't exist, you render yourself a lamppost. Literally, you render yourself a lamppost, cold and still. No meaning, no purpose, no happiness, no direction. You even deny the basic faculties such as the laws of logic, your reasoning, the laws of mathematics, the uniformity of nature. The very fact that you do science, you can do science, is because you accept that tomorrow will be the same as today. The world will be the same in 5 minutes as it is right now. They assume this. You have no reason to assume this on atheism. Because on atheism, everything's just here by chance. It's all controlled by blind random processes somehow. So there's no reason to believe that the nature is uniform. But they accept this, and when they do this, they presuppose Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when they're asked about Allah, they deny Allah. The reality of atheism. This is the reality, brothers. So in conclusion, inshallah, brothers and sisters, what I want to leave you with is not only understand these concepts, right? Not only understand these so we can defend ourselves and our families, inshallah, in the times we live in. And wallahi, it seems like things are just going to get worse. More information is going to spread. More lies are going to spread. So we need to arm ourselves with this knowledge and understanding, and also help our families. Not only this, to go out and positively make these people understand. Because many people, wallahi, many people follow these public figures such as Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss just like blind sheep. They're just blind sheep. I'm atheist. Why are you atheist? I don't know. Can you prove God does not exist? No. But I just don't know. They don't know what Dawkins said in his book. Their Quran has almost become the God delusion, his book, which is full of rubbish. If you read the book, it's full of rubbish. He doesn't know anything about philosophy. His arguments, his argumentation that he uses are flawed. But why do people pay attention to him? Because he's a public figure. He's been put out there as that. But another thing I want you to understand is, just because someone has a PhD, especially the young brothers and sisters here, when you go to school and you're quoted authorities such as Richard Dawkins or Krauss says this, never judge the claim based on the authority of an individual. You never judge their claim based on the authority. Always look into it, study it. Study it. Look at what they're saying. Forget that they have a PhD or a degree. This is just standing on the shoulders of giants. Forget all of this. Study what they're saying, inshallah. And look at it objectively. Use the aql Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with. He's blessed us with his intellect to use it, inshallah. So inshallah, to conclude, jazakallah khair, brothers and sisters, for turning up. I'm going to open the floor up to questions and answers, inshallah. So if you have any questions and answers in particular, with any particular subjects, evolution or anything like that, I'll try to address it the best I can. And may Allah bless you all for sitting through this, inshallah, and listening. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Jazakallah khair.
We would like to, now go on to questions and answers. If you guys have any questions or even things you missed out during the actual lecture, here's your time to ask. And can we just keep it specific to science and atheism and the topic of today, please? If you guys have any questions or any things you wanted to clarify, now's the time to ask.
How long do we have parking?
Until Maghrib.
What time's Maghrib?
9:20.
Inshallah.
Yes.
Evolution
The
real?
brother asked, is evolution real?
Okay, bismillah. Jazakallah khair, bro. Very good question, yeah, mashallah. Okay, there's a few things you need to understand. It's going to be a bit long. Just tell me if you get confused anyway, I'll clarify, yeah?
Evolution first. I don't think,
What's that?
Tell them what evolution is.
Okay, so do you understand what evolution is? Do you know that? Yeah? Okay, khair, he knows, inshallah. So basically, briefly, is what they say is that species evolved through over millions of years to the point where they developed, and then humans developed in the same way as well. Now, another thing about the scientific method, one thing was the how and the why, another thing is that it's limited, right? The scientific method is limited by something called induction as well, right? It's based on induction, yeah? Induction Another thing is that in science class, in colleges and universities, they will never teach you this. They will just tell you to do the science. But science is based on induction, inductive reasoning, which means a scientist does observations and then he comes to a conclusion. So he goes from a general set of data and he makes a specific conclusion. I'll give you an example, an analogy to put things into perspective. Imagine our brother here is a scientist. Yeah, he's just qualified. He's got his PhD in science, inshallah. Yeah, he's studying science, by the way. Yeah, mashallah, he's studying science, subhanallah. So he studies science and he becomes a PhD and he becomes a researcher. Now he is commissioned to go and study how many birds, what the color of birds is in Southall. Yeah, and he's given a month. Okay, he goes into the parks in Southall and he sits there all day long with his sandwiches and his picnic pack. He sits there all day long observing birds. Yeah, and he's recording it. Bird 1 flies over, brown. Bird 2, brown. Bird 3, brown. Bird 4, brown. Yeah? He does this for a month. And his data shows all birds are brown. Right? So what he does, he goes from this limited observation, which is only a month long. Say he observes 10,000 birds in a month. Yeah? He goes from his limited observation, which is limited. He hasn't seen all the birds. And he makes a general conclusion. All birds in Southall are brown. This is induction. This is induction, basically. So you go from a limited set of data and you make a general conclusion. Yeah? Now, here's the problem. Can someone see the problem in this? It's general. There's always a possibility that the next bird is black, or the next bird is white, or the next 10 birds are white. It's possible, right? It's possible. This is the problem with induction. It can't give you 100% truth. It can come close to the truth, but it can never give you 100% truth. So as far as evolution is concerned, from this perspective, actually, before, another thing you need to understand is that science is based on observation. Yeah? That's the whole method. You observe things, like the birds, you observe the birds, and then you make a conclusion. Yeah? Now, evolution is something that, if it happened in the past. Right? It happened in the past. And we only have a limited, as far as the data is concerned, I was speaking to a brother who's studying biology, he's doing his master's now in biology, and he told me that the data that you have in particular for evolution is very little. Right? And you can't observe it right now because it's not taking place right now. It happened, it's in the past. Not only this, it's based on induction, therefore it can't give you 100% truth. Right? So you can never have 100% truth. Right? That's point number one. Point number two is that the evidence that they have, and inshallah, we're working on our brother, inshallah, brother Fawaz, inshallah. If you want more detail at the end, please talk to him as well. He can give you more information as far as the evidence is concerned. But he's going to be writing a paper, and if you make a note of this, if you go into London Dawah Movement on Facebook, on the Facebook page, there will be a paper that's up, inshallah, soon, in about a month or two's time, which addresses evolution and breaks it down in a very academic way, inshallah. But the point is that this evidence that's there is very little, and what happens is that there's an inference that's made. Now look, remember what Bertrand Russell said? He said observations and reasoning based upon it, right? So here's what they do. They've got fossil, yeah? They've got these fossils. Now what they're doing is they're looking at these, and they're saying, let me see now. This fossil, maybe this fossil developed into this evolved into this, and this evolved into this. And there's huge gaps in between. Huge gaps, right? And they're inferring, so they're coming to a conclusion, they're inferring a conclusion. Doesn't mean it's absolutely true, right? Another beautiful point that Fawaz made was that imagine if Darwin, you know Darwin who came up with the theory of evolution, right? If Darwin never came up with this theory, right, and they just had this data in front of them, that's it, they would never be able to come to the conclusion that this evolved from this. See, this is the thing, it's presuppositions. If you presuppose that Darwin was right, then your bias is going to make you make that conclusion, right? But if that information wasn't there, it's very unlikely that it will come to the information. So what he said basically, if you just solely go by the evidence of science, you can't definitively conclude that it happened or it didn't happen. There's not enough there. But obviously the ones who have an agenda, particular individuals like Richard Dawkins, they will tell you evolution is 100% true. Based on what? Based on what he's saying, that's it. And he even says in a video interview, and it's on YouTube, he says clearly that if your agenda is to cure religion, then you have to make them believe that evolution is true. This is what he says. It's on record. There's a video on the London Dawah Movement YouTube channel refuting Dawkins in 1 minute. Brother Sabur, he goes through this and we play his clip and he says this clearly. This is his agenda. This is what he's trying to push down the throats of people. Doesn't mean it's absolutely true. Hopefully that clarifies that point, inshallah. Any other questions, inshallah? There's a brother.
What does the brother have to say about Hussein and his
Speak a bit louder.
I'm just asking, what does the brother have to say about Osama Hassan and his position on evolution?
I haven't studied it, bro, so I won't be able to tell you, inshallah.
Hassan, you know the Sahib Hassan's son who says that,
What does he say, bro?
well, he says that from an Islamic perspective,
Yeah.
that we could have evolved from apes.
Yeah, I personally don't maintain that position, right?
I know,
No, yeah, inshallah. Okay. I really don't know how he comes to this conclusion, but as far as I understand, the most sound understanding, or at least my perspective, I can't speak for everyone else, is that I believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created human beings with his own hand. As he says in the Quran, that he created Adam alayhi salam with his own hands, right? So as far as human beings are concerned in particular, we did not evolve, right? As far as animals and insects are concerned and other lower life forms, what I say, my perspective is, I wouldn't even say that, yes, the way science says it happened. I would say, Allah knows best, right? Because the scientific method is limited, it can only give us so much truth, as far as in particular, as far as evolution is concerned. So you can't really say, I personally wouldn't conclude because science says animals evolved, therefore 100% they evolved. No, Allah knows best as far as animals and other insects are concerned. Maybe they evolved as they tell us, or maybe they didn't. And Allah knows best. Because as far as if you look at the evidence, and again, inshallah, bro, if you want more information on this, brother Fawaz is the guy to talk to, inshallah. You can speak to him at the end, inshallah. You could go through what the evidences are and what the scientific evidences are, inshallah. Hopefully that answers the question.
One of the sisters asked, how should we deal with those who call themselves atheists but believe in the existence of God?
Okay. Firstly, we need to clarify their position, right? They're not atheists then, or you can't maintain atheism. Because atheism, I've got the Oxford Dictionary definition, if you like, if that's the most sound one. What it says is atheism is a disbelief or a lack of belief in the existence of God, or gods, right? So generally speaking, atheists will maintain that God does not exist, right? So if an atheist claims, or was they unsure about the existence of God?
But believe in the existence of God.
Or believe in the existence of God, well then they're not atheists. You can say they're deists or theists.
But they call themselves atheists.
Okay, you just have to clarify that position, that you're not really atheist by the definition of the term. You can call yourself whatever you like. You can call yourself a tree or a house, whatever you want to call yourself. But if you want to go by definitions, then the definition of atheism isn't that you believe in God and you call yourself atheist. You're a theist or a deist. Deist meaning someone who believes in God, but an unpersonal God who's just mechanical, and theist, someone who believes in a God who has a will and who like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who created everything, inshallah. Hopefully that clarifies that.
Another question from the sisters. They say, can we believe in evolution? Can we actually believe in evolution?
Okay. As far as I'm concerned, and the points that I've gone through, I would say, if it's more specific, what do you mean by believing in evolution? Is there any more?
Is there any
Okay, I'll cover both.
between Islam and
No. Here's the thing. We have to do an epistemic way in when it comes to source of knowledge, right? Now, here's what we need to understand. Science is limited. It's an amazing method. It's a beautiful method. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to use it, but it's limited. It's limited by its very nature. The Quran is absolute truth, and we can deductively prove it. Obviously, maybe later on, inshallah, at the end or something, we can go through it. But the Quran we can deductively prove to be from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we have to, right? That's our source of knowledge. So when it comes to, if there's a difference, say if there's a difference between what science is saying and what the Quran is saying, what do? We go with the Quran. Because it's the absolute source of knowledge. We've seen that science can't give us 100% truth. We've seen that science is limited by its very nature. It's based on empiricism, meaning it's limited to what our senses can attain. And our senses are flawed as well. I'll give you an example. When we have a temperature, we feel hot. It may be -2 degrees outside. Our senses are fallible. And science is based on our senses. Science is limited from many angles. It's a good method, but it's a limited method. So when it comes to, if science is saying evolution happened and the Quran is saying no, it didn't, as far as human beings are concerned, then we go with Islam. It's very simple. It'll be irrational to go with a lower method compared to the absolute truth. So that's my perspective on that, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. There's last question from sisters. The sister asked, what do we say to someone who says evolution is the reason why we exist, so we do not need God?
Okay. First and foremost, you can tackle it from many different levels. Firstly, you will say that evolution, wherever we'll have a discussion about evolution, you could tell them, wherever the case may be, firstly, evolution does not negate the existence of God. It does not negate the existence of God. Evolution is something that happened far later on. right? Once the earth formed, and once life somehow magically just popped into existence, which they can't explain anyway, right? They can't explain how the first living organism came into existence, right? And then evolution, you know, just if we grant you it for the sake of argument, took place. It has nothing to do with the existence of God. It has nothing to do with the origins of the universe or anything like that. So evolution doesn't negate the existence of God at all. This is misinformation. It can't be true from any angle. It's something that happened way later on. It doesn't have a foot in the door. Secondly, we can again go through the points about evolution and we can show them that, look, this is why it's not 100% truth. Science is limited method. We will go with the absolute truth, which is the Quran, inshallah.
Sorry, there's one more last question. One of the sisters asked, what do we say to someone who tries to say that Big Bang Theory is correct?
Okay, Bismillah. I'm going to just share as the little I know on this. Now, there's many models. As far as science is concerned, there's several models to the origins of the universe, right? The Big Bang model, or one of the models of the Big Bang, is the most popular and it's the widely accepted model, right? From a scientific perspective, crude scientific perspective. Now, if someone believes the Big Bang, it doesn't go against the Islamic teachings anyway, because we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the universe, right? And from that perspective, it makes sense that Allah could have created it in whichever way or means He chose to. If it was the Big Bang, then it was the Big Bang, right? So I don't see it conflating with Islam in any way. The Big Bang, we know the universe came into existence. This is what we believe. Allah created the universe. He created the heavens and the earth in 6 periods of time, as we're told in the Quran. So we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created all of these things. So yeah, whether the Big Bang or whichever, science will give us many models, but again, it doesn't conflict with Islam in any way.
Are there any more questions?
Any more questions
about this side?
I have an atheist friend who doesn't believe in God because he doesn't know what happens after death. Can you explain why?
Okay.
Tell them the question.
Okay, so what you said basically, you have an atheist friend who doesn't believe in God because he doesn't know what happens after death. Okay, first thing, bro, tell him that the question is a bit malformed, because existence of God and what happens after death, although they're related, but they don't have to be mutually exclusive, right? Existence of God is one thing, what happens after death is another thing. Second, you can tell in the Islamic perspective what happens after death, right? We're judged, day of judgment, and then there's either Jannah or Nar, heaven or hell, one of the two, right? So you could tell him this, but if it is in particular, if he's looking for... See, the problem is one thing, when we approach atheists, some atheists, we have to give them some rational reasons as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses us with one example, which substantiates that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. And to claim otherwise is silly. In the Quran, in chapter 52, verse 35 and 36, maybe make a note of this, bro, it's a very powerful verse. 52, 35 and 36, Allah says, were they created by nothing, or were they the creators of themselves, or did they create the heavens and the earth? Right? Now, it's an amazing verse, right? Because the exegetes have said that you can apply this logical breakdown, these possibilities, to anything that begins to exist, right? Now we know the universe began to exist, right? So apply this to the universe. Say, let's go through it together. Could the universe come from nothing? Could something come from nothing? Think about this. Can something come from nothing, bro? No. I mean, if I give you nothing, would you have? Nothing, right? So out of nothing, nothing comes. Possibility 1, doesn't work. Could the universe create itself? Could the universe create? Can something create itself? Can our beloved brother here exist and not exist and create himself, basically? You can't create yourself, right? It's impossible because it's a logical contradiction. To create yourself, you have to exist and not exist at the same time. Do you see the problem there? Because if you're creating yourself, you're already existing. But if you're existing, then you're not really creating yourself. It's a big problem. It doesn't work. Possibility 2 out of the way. Third possibility, were they the creators of the heavens and the earth? Did you create it? Did someone create the heavens? Did the human beings, something created, create the heavens and the earth? Think about this. You could say this. You can say something created the universe, but then what stops you from asking the next question? Well, what created that something that created the universe? Right? And you will go on forever. Right? If you go on forever, we will never have the universe in the first place. And this is why there has to be the first cause, which is uncaused. Because without this, you run into the problem of the infinite regress. Big problem. We wouldn't have the universe in the first place. If you say something created, something created, something created, something that created, and that created something that was created. If you're saying universe 1 was created by universe 2, and universe 2 was created by universe 3, and universe 3 was created by universe 4, and this went on forever, we would never have the universe in the first place. because you will never have a beginning point, right? So there has to be a first uncaused cause. So the most rational conclusion is that the universe was created by something uncreated, uncaused, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the beautiful thing about such verses in the Quran, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in this particular verse, He allows us to satisfy our own intellects. Because we go through the possibilities, created by nothing, doesn't work. Self-created, doesn't work. Something created creating something doesn't work. Therefore, it must be created by something uncreated. Simple, khalas. There's no other way around it. So inshallah, hopefully this will be a good argument you can use or share with them from the Quran itself, inshallah, that can clarify things for them, inshallah.